Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Celeste Rose, and welcome to the Circular Economy Manufacturing NYC Composting Workshop. On the panel today, as you can see, we have co-founder and director of Circular Economy Manufacturing, Barrett Roth. We have Maite Ortiz, our workshop coordinator, and it's our pleasure today to be hosting Kyleen, Compost Associate at the Lower East Side Ecology Center. So today we'll be talking about composting in New York City, different methods, best practices, and what actually happens to your food scraps once you drop them off at a collection site. Here we've got an overview of what today's workshop will look like a little bit. We'll be starting with a brief introduction to circular economy manufacturing and the Lower East Side Ecology Center, and some pressing news about the latter. Then Kyleen will go ahead and take it away, talking about reducing our waste, compost systems, both at small and medium scales, composting with Lower East Side Ecology Center, how to, advice, resources, sites, volunteering, etc. And finally, what happens after your food scraps are collected at the collection site. Finally, we'll have some time at the end where you can all drop in your questions in the comment section and we'll answer them for you in real time. Just as a reminder, all of our workshops will be posted onto our website at circulareconomymfg.com/resources, with not only the recording of this workshop, but also as a podcast, and with all of the resources that will be discussed during the workshop. So that's all from me. Now I'll pass on the virtual microphone, if you will, to co-founder and director of Circular Economy Manufacturing, Barrett Roth.
Thanks, Celeste. I'll be brief. I know we want to hear from Kyleen. Our company, Circular Economy Manufacturing, is taking single-use plastic and turning it into well-designed, durable products. You can see we're doing all of this in a solar-powered MicroFactory, where on one side we're shredding the plastic and on the other side we're rotating the products around in a mold. This is all part of an effort to transition from a linear to a circular economy. So rather than pulling resources out of the ground only to eventually burn or bury them, we're trying to cycle these materials into a continuous loop using only solar energy. So as sustainable designers, the goal is to create products in which everything fits within one of these two cycles. You have the biological cycle or biosphere on one half, and you have the technical sphere or technical cycle on the other. And as the co-author of Cradle to Cradle, William McDonough, would say, if we do that, we are in effect eliminating the concept of waste. So our process deals with the technical side, but our first product deals with the biological side. And our first product is a food scrap collection bin that we'll be using for people to begin collecting their food scraps. And so that's why we thought it'd be great to have the Lower East Side Ecology Center come and join us, and look forward to learning more from Kyleen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our workshop coordinator, Maite Ortiz. Oops, can't hear you, Maite. There we go.
Sorry about that. Well, I'm super excited to be here and to have Kyleen as our guest today to talk about Lower East Side Ecology Center and the compost systems within New York City. Before we start, I do want to talk about how, well, it's super important that we all give in our part into the compost systems of the city that we live in. So a little something that you can start doing now is to send a text to 21333. This campaign is being organized by the NRDC, and this way you will be getting talking points on why we should keep and how we're keeping our compost systems in New York City. Lately, the Lower East Side Ecology Center is being subject to being evicted to turn that land instead into parking lots. So texting this and getting your talking points, getting in touch with the mayor's office and the Parks Department, Mitchell Silver's office, to send your letters is a great way for us to start in supporting our compost systems in New York City. All right, I am super excited to be as Celeste said, giving the digital microphone off to Kyleen.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate the wonderful intro. And if any of you have questions on really what's going on with the composting community and programs around New York City, feel free to shoot those in question in the comments to this workshop. And I can also briefly explain that at the end as well. But yeah, thank you so much. I am a compost coordinator at the Lower East Side Ecology Center. And funny enough, I actually don't have a professional background in composting or environmental science. I actually studied fashion merchandising in school, which is completely different from what I'm doing now. But when I was in school, I studied a lot on waste management and sourcing and managing factories and such domestically and internationally. But during my curriculum in school, I actually realized that I'm more so interested in the sustainability end and waste management end. So after I graduated from school, I started volunteering at different groups, mainly for some reason in composting that kind of struck an interest in me. So my first volunteer opportunity was with Big Reuse in partnership with Department of Sanitation. They held a campaign called Make Compost Not Trash. And there I would actually do a lot of canvassing throughout my own neighborhood to promote composting initiatives in our city. And other than that, I also volunteered at composting sites. For example, Red Hook Compost, right next to that large IKEA in Brooklyn. And other, what was that?
Oh, no, I know that site.
Oh, it's awesome.
The solar engineer for that site is actually helping us with the solar on our MicroFactory.
Ooh.
So, yeah.
Yeah, like Red Hook Compost is all renewable energy source. So they don't use any machinery. Everything is basically hand worked, and they use their wind and solar energy to basically operate their like forced air system. So I love that. I love that yard. And after that, I actually got a really cool gig at Grow NYC, also as a compost coordinator, where I would basically man a lot of the staffed composting drop-offs throughout the city, whether that be at Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, or the Bronx. I would be there manning and educating the public about like company initiatives and programs and why composting is so important. And then now today I'm with the Lower East Side Ecology Center, doing everything and including leading workshops like this one, working at the compost yard, making crazy deliveries and pickups. So I'm getting my hands dirty in basically everything around compost. And then with that, I would also like to introduce the organization that I work for. We are a pretty old organization that was founded in the 80s by Christina Datz, who found that there were a lot of environmental issues in her neighborhood in the East Village. We started off as a recycling collectors, mainly paper, metal, plastics, things that in the 80s wasn't such a big thing, completely different from what we're doing now. So she invited community members to come and drop off their recyclables at our East Village garden. So it's right off 7th Street and Avenue B. And now, since that one basically took off, she started inviting people to drop off their food scraps at our garden. And since then, we've kind of become the pioneers of mission-based composting and solving environmental issues through tangible action plans. And then after that, we started introducing e-waste programs, and then having more drop-off locations in Manhattans. So on the bottom right is a photo example of one of our food scrap drop-offs, where sometimes they're staffed, sometimes they're not, but you can come and drop off your food there. And then on the left is a picture of me standing on top of a huge pile of food scraps when I was actually volunteering. And in the back, you can see all of our compost piles. And I'll get into that later of how this yard operates and such, but this is just kind of like an introduction to the Lower East Side Ecology Center. And then I always love to start off with displaying this food waste hierarchy to my audience because it shows the levels in which the most to least preferred way of reducing food waste. The main mission of composting in New York City is to really reduce our organic waste that's eventually going into landfills. And please note that when I say food waste, I'm referring to food that's already disposed. And that's completely different from when I say food scraps. And food scraps can be used as a resource. So as consumers, we have the choice of where our food scraps go. Once they hit the landfill, they become waste. So I'll be using probably those terms interchangeably, but I like to distinguish those two before I start with the presentation. And then as you can see from the table, we're kind of in the middle, like our program is right between small scale and middle scale locally based systems. But the most referred obviously would be to reduce our waste and edible food rescues. So there's a lot of small companies that actually take still edible good food that hasn't decomposed or hasn't expired yet, and we'll take it to places like other community organizations. And then there are other ways that are not listed here that you can be really creative with your food scraps. For example, just a week ago, I did a natural dyeing workshop, which is really fun. So I think people can get really creative how they can utilize their food waste before they decide to dispose of it. And for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to kind of get more in depth with our compost systems in New York City. For example, I'm going to start off with home composting systems. Now, there's a common misconception that composting is impossible in a big, dense city like ours, but I've seen some really creative and functional ways that does make composting doable, whether that be at home or commercially in large plots of land. So I'm going to be starting off with things like these systems and then going up from there. So the first one, and it's pretty common, is called vermicomposting, aka using a worm bin, which is a fun and interactive way for you to watch your food scraps at home be eaten and decomposed by red wiggler worms, who generate some of the highest quality of compost that can be found, aka they're called worm castings. Red wigglers are particularly suited for this system because they're prolific, thrive in habitats that contain large amounts of organic matter, and can tolerate a wide range of temperatures and conditions. Let's see. And this is also a low cost and low tech system that your kids or students or young family members will love as well. And then the next one, some of you may have seen before, it's called the cardboard box method, or you might have seen it as the core and ash method as well. And this is super new to me. This system definitely blew up during the pandemic when composting programs were shut down, but it is not new to composters in Japan, which is actually a pretty common way for you to compost at home. You will simply need a large compost box, cocoa peat, which are the fibers that are outside of the coconut husks, and then rice husk ash, both of which are used to create ideal conditions for thriving aerobic bacteria that colonize and decompose your food scraps. Unfortunately, I personally don't have experience working with this system just yet, but I do know that Barrett has. So if you have any questions with this method, definitely drop it in the comments, and he'll be able to troubleshoot all of that for you.
Happy to help. It's a cool method, and we're excited about trying it. So.
Yep. All right. And then the next one, for people or city dwellers that are lucky enough to have an outdoor space, there are a few contained options that combat odor and pests and also withstand the test of time. Granted, I will say there are other reasons that those problems may arise, but having containers like these sure do help. So tumblers are rotating containers that are usually elevated from the ground. They make it easy for you to turn and aerate your pile without necessarily needing other tools. But I will say it doesn't hurt to add in a shovel or two, take out your compost from your bin and giving it a good mixing. And then another one, which is actually pretty easy, a galvanized metal can, although some people also use plastic garbage cans and drill holes in them. This one is very, very low cost compared to the tumbler, which most people have to buy online or their local hardware store. A simple can with holes in it will do just fine as long as you're aerating your piles very well and have a good source of brown or carbon-rich material. Ooh, there's a question.
Yeah, we've got a mayor with which at-home method involves the least amount of maintenance, which also speaks to the question that I wanted to make you. What's the method that you would recommend New York City apartment owners that have small space or not much time to maintain their own composting system?
Honestly, I would say, even though I don't have a lot of experience with it, I would say the cardboard box method versus doing vermicomposting, which in some sense you have to handle it as like a pet. You have to make sure it's alive, you're putting the right conditions for these red wiggler worms. Versus the cardboard box method, you really just have to source your core and ash material. And then that's basically it, right? Brent, is there anything else that you can add to how easy that is?
Let me unmute. You have to purchase that, so you've got that issue. I'll qualify it for ours. You can do it inside. We put it out on the deck. It was during the well, it's still the pandemic. It was at the beginning of the pandemic, and we were, trying to find a way to continue composting once the city stopped, and that was really the impetus for the reporter to put out that article. It is pretty amazing how quickly it turns the material into a terrific soil amendment. And we talked a little bit more about this on the previous workshop, so if people they can go back and look at that one as well. But yeah, I'm really pleased with it.
Nice.
There's a couple of questions really interested on how to start home composting systems. So Nick wants to know which method would be the one that breaks down the food the quickest.
That is a good question. I will say in the next slide, I'll actually introduce something that's quite quick, and it's a fermentation process. But you will need an outdoor space for that. So let me get into the next slide, which are the small scale composting systems. So that quick one is at the end. So I'm going to start off with the other ones first. And in New York City, a very common one is a community garden or urban farm. And the point of these community gardens is to allow for community members to not only grow food, but also process their own scraps and yard clippings to make compost, which will eventually be used back into the gardens. So this is a great example of a mini closed loop system where organic matter will be used to amend soil that will grow more organic matter instead of heading to the landfills. Many community gardens in New York City actually do require a membership to drop off food scraps. But pre-pandemic, these gardens will also introduce open hours where you don't have to necessarily be a member, but you can come and drop off your food scraps there. And because gardens produce a lot of food scraps, they use what you see in the picture there is a 3-bin system. So basically there are 3 sections for you to add food scraps, and you start off with one first and filling the next one as the last one gets full. But the benefits of using this is the ability to move those front wooden slats, so you can remove material as needed, put it back in, and it can also be made with salvage materials as well. A lot of people use like shipping crates or excess wood panels, and then in addition to that, it can actually process a good amount of organic material. And then the next one are micro-hauling services, which are a new thing, but popularity has skyrocketed since the pandemic started. Organizations like Reclaimed Organics in Manhattan make scheduled pickups to retrieve your food scraps right from your doorstep. It's safe, easy, and a great way to support small composting services with a fee. And with this one, if you're not down to process your own food scraps, this is a great way to just drop your food scraps and get it out of your mind. And then a step up from that 3-bin system at like a community garden are small windrows. This one here that's photographed is a small Brooklyn site that is BIPOC run called BK Rot. And these can be done at a community garden scale or even a backyard using those small windrows. A compost windrow, if you don't know, is a long open pile of organic matter. It doesn't necessarily need to be covered by anything, and you don't need to build any container or use fancy equipment. But like other systems, you would simply need your food scraps and brown carbon-rich material like wood chips and leaves mixed together. And then for extra odor protection, what we do at our compost yard and what BK Rot does is actually cap or cover your food scraps with wood chips. And it does wonders, I'll tell you that. And then lastly, the one I really want to talk about is bokashi, which is actually not composting. It is a Japanese fermentation method that literally means fermented organic matter. So instead of rotting, which happens in a compost pile, food type microbes that can be found in pickling or brewing or even baking are used. With bokashi, you can actually ferment any and all food scraps, even animal products, but you will need special things such as plastic buckets and lids. And the magic and very necessary ingredient for bokashi is called EM1, which is a microbial inoculant, which can be DIY'd or even purchased, but it is basically a small liquid inoculant that you add to organic matter like wheat bran, anything that can basically be mixed into your food scraps. And like I said before, it's definitely doable at home, but I decided to add bokashi to small scale systems because it is a 2-step process. So first you're fermenting your food scraps at home, and then you will need a location for you to bury those food scraps. So whether that be a community garden, your backyard, you need to bury that food scrap so it can basically decompose there or be fed to worms or other critters in the ground. But basically I said that this was the fastest one because it only needs to ferment for 2 weeks and then be buried into the ground, versus when you have your compost piles or your backyard tumbler, it could take months for you to basically get finished products. Depending on how big your system is too, it could take longer. So this one definitely has its benefits, but you will need that EM inoculant to start fermenting your food scraps.
Yeah, bokashi is great. We have
you tried it?
Yeah, I actually used to do it in my apartment. That liquid is great for just cleaning out my kitchen and the sink and the bathrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it fertilizes my plants. They were so grateful. We have a super interesting question talking about community gardens. This question's by Stephen Cook. So he runs a community garden, and he wants to know any tips into building or buying and how to successfully keep out odors and pests.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. This is definitely New York based, but you don't have to be in New York to attend. But when I started off working, I actually took a Rat Academy course that was only a few hours long, but it gives you knowledge behind how pests like rats, what they're attracted to, any tips and tricks how to avoid them. So I would say that odor and pests are definitely a big concern in terms of people that are not familiar with composting. But the main thing would be to make sure any garbage is out of your garden, not close to your food scraps. And then depending on what system you have, for example, if you want to do a 3-bin system, you can add different equipment to your bins to detract those pests. So a lot of people line their bins with chicken wire. They put out tarps underneath as well, so they don't, scurry underneath and then come up from the bottom. And then for any system, I would always say make sure you have a good source of browns. Browns definitely help with odor, aeration, and then making it less attractive to your pests and your little critters that are running around your community garden. Yeah.
I hope that's helpful, Stephen. We have a little question about bokashi by A. Mayer. So she wants to know how important the ratio is between vegetables, meat, cooked foods. In my experience, it wasn't really about the ratio between those foods, just piling them in there and squishing them up. But anything else you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say about like material ratio. I will say the smaller your food scraps are, the better, and the more surface area, I guess, these inoculants and the other food type microbes will be able to ferment your food scraps. So the smaller, the better, whether it be bokashi or composting.
Yeah, and the more you can get in there.
Definitely.
And there was a question earlier, Kyleen, which one do you feel has the least amount of maintenance? I'm not sure the answer to this. I have an answer in my head, but I'm curious what your answer is.
Yeah. If you can do any of these systems, I always say a tumbler has the least amount of maintenance because you're literally cranking up that tumbler, mixing it around. You have that protection from weather, pests, and any odors. So I would definitely say if you have the ability to grab a tumbler, I would get one of those. Yeah.
All right, let's keep going.
Yeah. I don't want to run out of time.
Tell us all about the medium scale composting system.
Yeah. So the big one that I would like to talk about is basically the New York City Compost project, which is funded by the Department of Sanitation, but it is run by these 7 composting programs. Specifically, one of us is us. So we basically help reduce waste in New York City and rebuild the soil by giving New Yorkers the knowledge, the skills and opportunities they need to produce and use compost locally. And we have one basically in each borough. So wherever you are in New York, you definitely have a hub for composting there. And then getting more in depth with these programs, we offer these 3 main things. So the first one is outreach and education. For example, things like these workshops. We always love doing workshops, or even outreach at our drop-off sites. We do that as well. So definitely check out online to see what kind of events that we're having. The next one is technical assistance. This is definitely more so behind the scenes, but we often do go to community gardens and troubleshoot any issues that they're having, or even, as you can see in this picture, we even build those 3-bin systems for them as well. So if you are a part of Garden and you would like to start something, definitely hit us up. And then last one, and probably most important for this workshop, is food scrap drop-offs and local composting, and which has been very difficult before the New York City Compost Project to have large-scale compost yards processing our own compost. And then to get more into depth, I would like to show you really easy steps to start composting with us at the LES Ecology Center. So the first one, obviously, is to start collecting your food scraps. And for us, this is a list of what we can and we can't take. Please be in mind that we don't take any animal products, and no infested or diseased plants or those biodegradable plastics. And one, because in our systems, or in general, any animal products actually introduce more pathogenic area. For example, you're risking more E. coli spreading throughout your compost piles. But yeah, keep in mind with this versus bokashi, where you can basically ferment / compost anything. So yeah, take a screenshot or go online and start collecting these food scraps. And the next one is to store your food scraps. So we always like to promote using reusable containers or something like that to store your containers in. We usually have a lot of questions on like the ideal place in New York City to put your compost. And I personally either use a compost bin. Actually, let me show you mine. This is mine. Mine is a 2-gallon bucket. And
Awesome.
I always advise having like a screw top lid for odors. But before I started collecting more food scraps at home because we're cooking more, I used to store my food scraps in the freezer or in the refrigerator, especially those that can only make it to a food scrap drop off once a week. It really helps freezing your food scraps beforehand, makes it less messy, less liquidy. And then yeah, go ahead.
You brought it up. That's actually why we created this shape, is to fit. We found that a lot of Manhattan composters were storing, or New York City composters were storing their food scraps in their freezer and just cobbling together whatever they could. So to your point, yeah, we tried to design something specifically for that application.
Yeah, definitely. I think people have trouble with like, what do I put it in? Like, I can't fit anything in my freezer, and like, definitely like having that size of a container is usually perfect. So,
yeah, and there's no perfect place to get started either. I started using old chip bags and put them in the freezer. So
the important thing is to just start collecting it.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing I would like to point out that actually started recently is we've been accepting BPI certified compostable bags, which are really great to line those containers at home if you would like less of a mess. So BPI is the Bioproducts Institute, and they test and certify the material that the bag is made of, that it will break down within 180 days. But we actually find it decomposes a lot faster. It might be different for a backyard compost or a smaller scale, but for us, it composts like nothing, basically. So we're okay to take those bags as well.
Awesome. We were talking in our last workshop how some bags aren't actually compostable or biodegradable, even though they say they are. What's that look like on your side once you're going through compost, just these bags coming out?
Oh man, yeah. I mean, that's the reason why we also like to staff our drop-off sites, so that we can see what people are dropping off before it hits our compost yard. Because when it hits our yard, we just have a plethora of bags that are green and say biodegradable, but have no certifications to it whatsoever. So I would say, folks at home, be careful what you're seeing on those bags, because they're greenwashing you. These places are greenwashing you with these bags. So yeah, make sure, do some research especially with BPI compostable bags. Just take a look at it and research it if you're interested in using it. Yeah, so that kind of goes into, our located drop-off site near you. This is kind of a list of our drop-off sites, mainly in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan as well. But there's a link that I've provided. I don't know if we can add that into the comments, but it's a New York City drop-off tracker that was started by just a regular composter, Belinda Chu. She has a blog called A Healthy Blueprint, and she created this Excel sheet of every single drop-off site in New York City. So even though if these are not close to you, I'm sure you'll find one.
Alex, first off, Alexander Barrett would like to compliment the Ecology Center with the beautiful wooden bins.
Oh, thank you.
But he would also like to know if these composting sites are open during the winter.
That's a great question. For any public drop-off site that is hosted by the New York City Compost Project are normally open during the winter. But if you are thinking of any community gardens, I would check in with them because sometimes community gardens do close in the winter time. So for us, we're open all the time. We're open through snow, windy days. We're literally there all the time. So yes, we're open. Any other questions before this part?
No, let's keep going.
All right, cool. All right, so I would like to get into something that not a lot of people see, but are actually intrigued of what happens to their food scraps after they drop it off, and how does it work at our compost yard. So you may have seen this before, but this is where we take all of our food scraps down on East River Park. We're located right below the Williamsburg Bridge, next to the Corlears Hook Pier. You can definitely Google that too if you guys don't know where it is, and also on our website. Yeah, we are a very large site with windrows. We have our bobcat there, and you'll be able to see it here in action. So this is the first step where we drop off all of our bins, we unload it, and create a bed of wood chips first so that we can cap the food scraps on the bottom, lay the food scraps on top, and then we mix it well together and cap it off again, like I said before. So this is kind of like a video with our little pigeon friends that come every day and like to gnaw on our food scraps. And then our bobcat working. And you can see it's snowing. This is recent. So we even worked through the snow too. Yeah, that's the first part. And then I have to manually do the next slide. Let's see.
There you go.
Great. And then the next part I want to show you is something that we do quite frequently, even like once a week, at every 2 weeks. We aerate our pile, which is very important because we want to make sure that we have an aerobic compost piles for those aerobic hungry microbes, bacteria, and fungi. So this is Peter, who is pictured on the right, operating our bobcat and putting food scraps in a new pile. And as you can see from the left and the right, the difference between the piles after it's been a few months and how it looks like. And you can see in the middle of the pile on the right is fully decomposed. No leftovers. Although we do get some, like avocado pits here and there that are really hard to compost, but they're still there, aerating our piles. Oh, we're playing it again. Sorry, guys. Not technically savvy. And then once we turn our piles, we also want to make sure that we are taking temperatures of each pile. And so it has a long probe that tries to go deep inside of our piles and make sure that it reaches over a temperature of 101 degrees for at least 2 weeks consecutively. And what that does, that it goes through these stages. So it goes through the mesophilic stage, the thermophilic, and then also the active or the curing stage where it cools down. So during that active stage, we have a breakdown of like very hardy material like fats and proteins. Although we don't take fat and animal products, but we do get some in there by accident. But we want to make sure that's fully broken down. Like I said before, they introduce pathogenic bacteria, making it more dangerous to use. So we just want to make sure that we can hit above 131 within 2 weeks. And then after that, it goes through a curing stage. And what happens is that all the bacteria that are working through that hot compost is turned over, and the compost is cooling down. So we're able to, one, make sure the pH balance is leveled off, nothing too acidic, nothing non-acidic. So it goes through that process for at least 1 month before we go through this sifting phase and distributing. So this is our really cool sifter, or Some people call it a trommel. And this is a really fun thing you can do if you volunteer with us, is going and seeing through the sifting process. So again, we use the Bobcat to maneuver material into this little slide, and then it goes through the sifter. And then my coworker, Hannah, she is kind of like sifting through even the large pieces of leftovers, like wood chips, avocado pits, because we're going to eventually put those leftovers back into the new piles. So we're reusing that material. We don't just get rid of it. And in doing so, we can do that last step of removing any excess contaminants, for example, rubber bands or stickers. Make sure to take those off, twist ties, and even really crazy things, for example, like spoons, knives, or keys get lost in there too. So we just want to make sure that they're all sifted out before we reintroduce those food scraps to our piles.
Right. Stickers and bags, I would think, but keys?
Yep, we found those before. Keys, just other small metal objects, or just random things. Even plastic utensils, we just gotta get them out. And then what I didn't explain during, I'll play it again, is underneath that sifter is all of the fine materials, which we like to distribute at the green market or to gardens. But this is a fine material that we use back into our green spaces.
What's the oddest thing you've found during sifting?
Definitely like metal utensils, but I like to share that I found a ceramic plate at our drop-off site, just sandwiched between frozen food scraps. And I'm just like, sure, I'll take it. I'll take the plate. Why not? So that was a funny thing. I was just like, this is it. This is the top. And then, go ahead.
Nick was also dying to know what was the weirdest thing you had sifted.
Yeah.
There's
I've sifted credit cards before.
Really?
Like credit cards, debit cards. They just fly in there. I don't know.
There's a great question from Ada. She's asking, what if a bunch of New Yorkers started to compost? Would Lower East Side have the capacity to support this increase?
Oh man, yeah, that's a good question. We've actually never hit capacity even before the pandemic, but that's because the Department of Sanitation had introduced the organics curbside program. So along with your recyclables at home, we had those brown bins where you could put all of your organic matter, and the Department of Sanitation would actually take it out of New York City to use or to give it to urban farms upstate, or use it in digesters for renewable energy. So in that case, other than us, there are plenty of other options if all New Yorkers composted. I hope if we did, we would have a great composting program in the city. Yeah, exactly. But like I said before, with what's going on since the pandemic, the curbside program has paused since May because it wasn't reintroduced into the budget. So right now, drop-offs are the only way to go, or composting at home. Ooh, another question.
Yeah, she wants to follow up and know if a business wants to buy a large quantity, do you do large drop-offs?
So because we are we're a nonprofit, we usually do distributions to community organizations. So whether that be a large community garden or another nonprofit organization, or even a school, which we'll actually get into. This is where the compost goes. We mainly do like free distributions. But that's a really good question, and you should definitely email me about that, because no harm in asking at this point, since a lot of the places we had distributed before are closed. So yeah, shoot us an email on inquiring about commercial purchases. So yeah, so this is where all the compost goes. That's me on the left at Tompkins Square Green Market, handing or selling small packages of finished compost, and we even make our own potting soil as well. So we sell two products at the green market. We also do stewardship events, and that's where we use all of our where we use compost and even mulch, where we can green our street trees. And then we did a lot of donations to community organizations, like I said before. So yeah.
How much were you selling the bags of compost for?
So we have 3 sizes. So 1 pound bags were $1.50. 5 pound bags were $6, and then huge 20 pound bags were $12. But I will say that we are hosting a distribution event, I believe, starting in March, where you can actually come pick up unsifted compost at our compost yard for free. So
cool.
Definitely hop onto that. We'll be announcing that soon. But to kind of like finish my portion, I would like to say whether your composting looks like this or like this at a green market, in a backyard, or even just at home, I think that there's something for you. And I hope this has inspired you to start composting with us. So have a good time. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Kyleen. That was awesome. We've been jumping
Thank
in.
you.
Thank you, Kyleen.
Welcome.
All right, so before we head off to any more questions, I do want to remind all our viewers and anybody who is watching this in the future that a great way to support all of our composting systems and the Lower East Side Ecology Center and the land that they use to do all these compost processes is to get into communication with our parks department, with our major's office, and make sure that they get the right budget and support from not only these departments, but from us as well. Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Oops, Celeste, I think you're muted.
She's muted.
There we go.
Hello. Yeah, no, so thanks so much to our panelists and for everybody who joined and for all the great questions. That was really, really wonderful. I think we still have some questions that might not have been responded still. So, and if you haven't asked a question that you would like to, feel free to drop them there and we'll answer them for you. Let's see. So Alexander Barrett asked, what's the deal with PLA and can Lower East Side Ecology Center compost it?
Yeah, so I believe PLA is number 7 plastic.
Well, it's the biodegradable. 7 is kind of anything that's not 1 through 6. And so 7 sometimes could be the biodegradable plastic. So PLA is the kind of natural color plastic that you'll see a lot of environmentally minded restaurants using these days.
Yeah, so I'm assuming these are like the plasticky lids or even like the utensils, things like that. So yeah, actually really good question. We don't accept those like the harder compostable plastics, PLA and such, just because we don't have the technology to break it down quick enough. A lot of these industrial composters have shredders for that purpose of using compostable plastics that are hard, like utensils. So unfortunately, we do not. In New York City, it's really hard right now to compost those since the curbside program stopped and paused their service. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Oh, here we have Hong Shi asking whether there is a recommended ratio of composting and potting soil for houseplants. It's a really good question.
Yeah, really good question. I get this a lot at the green markets. And what I advise, if you already have your plants potted, what you would do is you would put finished compost on top, and that's called top feeding. So every time you water your plants, that liquid will dilute the very, what's it called? very potent compost into something that's a little bit more diluted, which your plants will take it in by its roots. So for smaller houseplants, I usually go for about a 1/4 inch to even 1/2 inch. And then if you have bigger, let's say like fig trees or something, I would go for about 3/4 inch to 1 inch. And then when you're putting compost in your houseplants, always make sure that's only in your soil, not touching the stems, not on top of the leaves, because you risk burning your foliage. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much, Kyleen. Here from the one and only Butter Croissant, asking if there are any resources for those living in the outer boroughs for composting.
Yeah, so I think outside of the boroughs, for example, if you're in New York, you can check to see in your neighborhood if there are any community-run composting initiatives, such as community gardens or other municipal services, like a curbside program in New Jersey, or you can look at microhauling, like I said before, with reclaimed organics. If you have any other small microhauling services and would like, so definitely take a look at that company if you would like to start composting outside of the boroughs.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm laughing just because of a comment. Oh, would you like to ask the question?
Ooh, good volunteer question. Yes, we are definitely still taking volunteers. I don't know if anybody, is this shown on the question?
Yeah. It is, but just for our podcast listeners, the question is, how do I sign up to volunteer? And asking whether the Lower East Side Ecology Center is still taking volunteers during the pandemic.
Yes, we're definitely still taking volunteers. And honestly, the volunteers have definitely helped us process all of our compost and even doing like COVID support at the green markets. But basically, just to make sure we have information, is that you would have to sign up on our website under the Jobs and Volunteering tab. And there you get signed on to our volunteer email. So every Friday we send out an email for our volunteer opportunities, and it basically gives you a private Eventbrite link, and you can sign up for slots. But we have 3 categories of volunteering. So one is at the green markets, where you'd be helping doing more like face-to-face education, and that's usually with me or Hannah. The second one is at our compost yard, a little bit more physical activity. You'd be helping us process the compost or doing something a little bit more light, like sifting and bagging compost. And then the third one, which will be coming up soon once it starts getting warmer, is our stewardship volunteer opportunities, which is mainly doing things like delittering East River Park, doing like gardening events or even street tree care events. So definitely sign up for our volunteer email list.
Thanks very much, Kyleen. I am actually going to go ahead and answer the butter croissant question because for a serious reason, I promise. Because for those of you who didn't join our last workshop, Composting 101, last month, we talked about what can be and what can't be composted. Organic matter can be composted generally, but as we talked about, there's usually sort of like a rule of thumb where you shouldn't really be composting anything that hasn't grown from the earth. So even though you think that, a butter croissant is organic, but it might not always be the best to put it in your compost bin.
Yeah.
Right. So now we have another question from Doris Lee asking, I'm doing the indoor cardboard box method, but the scraps aren't breaking down at all. What are some techniques to get your compost warm and active? Just a quick preface to this. We've shared a couple of times an article in the New York Times by Hiroko Tabuchi, who sort of she sort of started this thing about, if you don't have the resources, maybe if you don't have the space, especially living in a small apartment in New York City, how can you start composting within your tiny New York City apartment without it having any smell? So we've sort of been talking about this quite a lot, sharing this resource. So this is where this comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this one.
Would you like to?
Yeah, I was going to just jump in. I would make sure that you're using ash. I've tried it with the biochar, and I haven't had as good a results. But I found that the ash helps a little bit, and that it spreads a little bit more evenly. And making sure that you've got a really you're starting with a coir block and letting the food scraps kind of soak into the coir block. I found that helped. So I know some people have taken the coir, the shredded coconut, and added water to it initially. I let the juices from our food scraps provide that moisture, and I don't know if that made a difference or not, but we didn't really have a problem, and it was seemed to be breaking down pretty quickly. This was also in the summer though too, so you know, maybe that had an effect. I don't know if you're doing it inside or outside, but yeah, just there are a lot of different variables. But I would start by making sure you're using a good hardwood ash, and just getting the coir straight into the food scraps.
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll post that New York Times article in our resources as well, so you can check that out. Let's see, any further questions?
I think we're coming up on time too, so
yeah, that was perfect timing. Well, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for everybody attending, everybody dropping their questions in there, all our panelists. Remember, you can go to circulareconomymfg.com/resources at the end of this. In the coming days, we'll put up the recording of this and the podcast and any resources that we've been talking about. So yeah, happy to see you all, and looking forward to seeing you all in our next you're welcome, Butter Croissant, in our next workshop. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Have a good
Kyleen.
night. Thank you very much, Kyleen, for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.